Welcome. So we're going to jump right in and begin in the traditional uh, Buddhist way, also mountain stream way. And so I invite you to take refuge with me, taking outer refuge in the Buddha who showed the way, his Dharma teachings, and then the Sangha that supports our practice. Likewise, taking the inner refuge in our own intrinsic Buddha nature, radiant, open-ended, unfathomable. And in the Dharma taken to heart that recognizes this is actually the way it is. Buddha is on the inside, never to be found on the outside or at any other place or time. And taking refuge not only in how the Sangha supports us, but in how we can support Sangha, how our practice can clarify our channels so we can be of better help to others. And so in order to accomplish those things, we practice.
As you center yourself with the refuges. We come to this place right here. No place else. No past, no future. Just right here. And first, just bringing full attention to the world of sensation, the body, as it informs us of this momentary experience, as it arises and passes. Ultimately, like the refuges, no inside, no outside. Just this continuity of awareness that ultimately knows no boundaries. Yet we are the boundaries. We create the distinction, whether it's just acknowledging your body sitting, your mind resting in its own nature, and the heart being itself. So if it feels comfortable, just to acknowledging the breath as your life breathes itself. You can simply scan through the body if that's helpful, from the crown of the head to the tip of the toes, as a means of staying connected to momentary awareness. And ultimately to the grand scheme of things, the mind, body, and heart, fully attentive, resting in the here and now. And again, you may stay with the breath, you may stay with the body, you may rest with the simple truth of that knows, there with the knowing or the awareness itself. And depending on where you're at, maybe just stay with the breath, keep it simple. If you note the breath, life is breathing you. You can stay with that. Sometimes they refer to as whole body breathing, the whole experience. Or just noting the comings and goings. Things arise, are known by us, and pass away over and over again. You are the summation of all your thoughts, all your sensations, all the movement of the heart towards away from things. Ultimately relaxing, coming to ease in this place of refuge. Nature of your mind is to wander off. And the nature of this practice is to actually awaken, to know all things here and now. No place to get lost. If we can bring all things to this center point, this still point, this place where peace and ease hold all things. If you find yourself wandering off, it's not good or bad. It's just the possibility of including it in a larger picture. That story, that thought, that memory, that plan, that fantasy, all in a bigger context. Oh, I am here. Just relax into the one who knows. No coming or going, just that that knows, aware in its simplest form. the mind at rest. Changes come and go, but the mind actually is at rest. One follows a thought, thinking somehow it'll go somewhere. Ultimately, like a bubble in a stream, it will pop and you will instantly be back here, sitting. Stay here.
So we'll take a 5 minute stretch and bathroom break. It's good when everybody's happy. So then I'll repeat that for the Zoom world. I was mentioning that when I first came into Mountain Stream and into the center and into the hall, um, I was touched by the attunement that I felt in the hall as well as the tankas and everything. And then I noticed on the mantle there with scotch tape a newspaper clipping of Ruth Denison. And a smile just broke over my face because Ruth was an important teacher for me. And I did not expect this. And then I noticed this very sweet photograph that's up there now of John and Ruth, just cheek to cheek. Um, and so I started talking about that to Marcia, to John, and when Robin appeared, to her, about how apparently Ruth was an important teacher for both John and I. And so then on her own initiative, Robin drilled down into the internet and found a photograph of Ruth, this one that's uh, in here in the front. And then she framed it and put it on the mantle. And as I saw that, then the thought arose, oh, we should honor her, John and I, because that's how it works when we're in the flow, that what each of us do influences the other. And so we're in this interconnective web. And when the intentions are pure, uh, things happen, like thoughts arise in the mind. So that thought arose in the mind. I presented it to John. Why don't we get together and do this thing? And he was all for it. And so that's why we're here tonight. And so what we're going to simply do is just tell a few stories about Ruth, about who she was for us, about how she taught. We're going to like trade off one after the other. And then we're going to leave some space for you guys to weigh in and also for other people who know Ruth, have met her, if they want to contribute, that would be good too. So we're going to have time to touch on a few things, but we're not going to have time to go into much depth. So some of these topics are going to be quite fertile. A woman teacher in Buddhism. What's that? Having an integrative kind of Dharma teaching. Trauma. Some other things. And so we can continue to delve into these things and unfold them if you want to, going forward in time. So, want to kick us off?
I will jump off. No kick, just jump, you know. First of all, I want to, there are some of her bones up here that my friend Robert Beatty, who lives up in Portland at his center, sent me to Pier as a, you know, traditionally in all Buddhist traditions, they take, there's also called rinsel, which are beads which form in very high beings that when they cremate them, they collect these things And if you ever go to Chiang Mai or different places, they will have collections of these things. And Lama Zopa, uh, 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 who's who just died recently, but he would take and collect a lot of these bones, and he would go around and have a and uh, and brought all these relics of physical relics of Milarepa, of some of the great saints come down through the centuries. And it may seem like a mundane thing, but it's actually it's a real physical thing. And I remember being in Sarnath, where the Buddha taught quite a bit. And I was reminded of it. I don't know if somebody came up and, oh, that in the behind the 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 big statue of Buddha and all these things, in the back was a relic of the Buddha that was actually from the Buddha. And when the Buddha died, um, they took his bones and they broke it up into 5 pieces that became different stupas or uh, they're really what are they, reliquaries? And and it's really traveling. If you have, you've probably run across these things. They are that thing that rises into the sky, carries bones of Buddhas, and very moving in many ways. And it's times by Buddha bones, but I have no idea, you know, uh, if they're real or not. That's not the point. I really, it's about that it really, we are simply what we believe. And so there's a bit of maybe realism or it's the fact that there is a physical presence that stays. And if you ever have the chance to visit one of these relic things that Lama Zopa used to do around the world, and they went to Auburn a couple times, and it was awesome. You could act the there's almost a sense of tranquility when you walked in the room with all these relics. So I think, over the years, we have become more and more scientific, and this is not scientific. This is really about, that you know, touches the mind and the heart and allows you somehow to also recognize that there's more going on here than meets the eye, you know, where it's in some ways such a scientific culture that just kind of we want to see it in one way. And I'm not saying because there's also magical thinking. I'm not saying there's the middle way, somewhere between the mysticism of it and the physical reality of it. And we somewhere there is the middle way, somewhere we hold both pieces in it. And Ruth was a incredibly, you know, she was a mystical creature. And I was thinking back when I first my first retreat with her. My son is 46 or 47 now, and my first retreat, he was just a schmutz. He was a little schmutz, and we went in Santa Barbara to uh, to a center there where Ruth taught, and what I remember was, you know, our culture was not into kids too much then. My son was probably one of the first in the Dharma group. And Sylvia Borstein came, and she, between the three of us, we would take care of Ty. That's my son's name. And during the intervals, and it was really very sweet. And and then later, I went up to, where was it? Oh gosh, I went up to Oregon to a 10-day retreat there, and I, it was on a farm, and I had to live in an apple where they stored the apples, and humid and cold. Those were the two things I remember: humid and cold. And I had a great retreat, though. She was just a fabulous teacher, in the sense that she began with. I'd come from India, and I had spent maybe 2.5 years by that time in India, and studied with the Tibetans a lot. And then I started sitting with under this flag of U Ba Khin, which was her teacher. And so I felt very privileged. And over the years, I became good friends with her, and met her many times at many retreats, as I spent most of my life in retreats, in and out of them, you know. And not that I learned very much, but it was just, this whole thing of showing up, and then to be this community. And one of the pieces of the community was always Ruth. And Ruth, I have to say, this is a little bit, because I don't want to go on too long. And this is really kind of the crux of it, that I studied with her when she was okay, and she had used a cane. And as that became more and more problematic for her walking, she ended up pretty crippled, you know. And she had such a traumatic history, in which I won't go into right now, but it is a traumatic scene that she went through, because she was, I was born right at the end of the war, and she was born, you know, maybe 10, 13 years before. So at the end of the war, and especially since she ended up on the Russian side when they divided it up. So there's a lot of trauma there. And so I think in some ways that trauma just, uh, you know, her body took it. She didn't, but her body did. And so she ended up going to Germany to Ilse Gendler. She was a teacher of somatic, one of the probably first somatic teacher at the gymnasium in Germany. And she went there, and I don't know what actually happened there. She never said, at least to me, or I wasn't privy to it. But suddenly she was back to a cane, and she was wheelchaired before she went. And whatever happened there, and in that she released all the teachings she had learned. And she had spent years in the Zen community in Japan, and with U Ba Khin in Burma, and then she came to States, and her husband was a famous psychiatrist who was very socially magnetic. And, so they had these huge parties in LA, and and I mean, it's history. Now it's history. At that time, it was just, that's what was happening. And she was lovely. I'll let you
Hmm.
play, because I can play and play.
Thank you. Uh, okay, since we've gone into that history, then I'm going to share what John's a little reluctant to share. And I'm going to do that because just so happens today I went on her website. And if you want to learn more about her, go to her website. And in her website, there's a transcript of an interview that she gave in 1977, in which she talked about when she was a young woman, what happened to her during the war as the Russians came in. And she was basically repeatedly raped and underwent all sorts of trauma. Then practicing the Dharma, she was gifted in that. She was recognized as gifted. She was granted permission to teach by Uba Khin. Only 4 or 5 were, and only one woman, that would have been her. This is quite some time. This is very early on. This is first wave Dharma coming to the West. So even with her high capacity, she was still crippled inside. Her body manifested the trauma. So I had a career dealing with this. It's very common to me that it can happen to someone's body, it can happen to the mind going quite crazy, or it could also happen to the energy, emotional snags, blockages, and so forth. Manifests differently for everyone. So it's important, I think, this thing that happened to her with Elsa, because this wasn't Buddhism. This was experience near attunement, body attunement, sensory awareness. And this was extremely helpful for her, obviously. It loosened the holding inside, because it's like that sometimes. We're holding, but we don't quite know how we're doing it. We know we're tense, we carry tensions, but we aren't able to wrap our warm hands around that pain. So we need to pull out all the stops to get to what needs to be got to. So Ruth was a pioneer in terms of combining very traditional Dharma practice, particularly Vipassana, with sensory awareness, bodily awareness. She was one of the very early innovators that was integrating something psychology or somatic work with strict Dharma. And this seems like to be a very fertile way forward for us to do this. Even the meditation John led us in today, you can see there's a lot of different sources he was drawing from to help us settle into our system, open our minds, and tune in to what needs to be tuned into, to touch what has felt untouchable. So this integrative approach, Ruth was one of the first to do this.
Ruth's somatic awareness, and I want to refer back to Uba Khin, who, because she came out of the Zen tradition, and had spent 3, 4 years going back and forth to Japan from her home in LA. And so she had picked up a lot, but then she met a great master, you know, Uba Khin. And, they used to say that you'd write the interview sheet and he would just put his hand on it. And he wouldn't read it. He would just kind of feel what was there of that person. And that's kind of how, he was. He also was he worked in finance for actually several different aspects of the Burmese government at that time, which not saying much these days, but at that time, and he had this uh, transmission propensity that was incredibly powerful. And so she didn't spend so much time with him, but she had done the preparation work. Then it was the contact. It's like with Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Mun. There's only 3 days, that he actually spent with Ajahn Mun Bharata. That's not much time. What can happen in the sense that if you take things out of time and you see that there is, this ability to transmit something. And certainly she got this transmission. And, one of the ironies here is she came back and teacher I had at the time, SM Goenka, she was only to teach women. Of course, that was it. She didn't do it. You know, she had this kind of rebellious mind. And so she taught everybody, and which was really the right thing to do at that time. And Uba Ken, he really had passed on, and she was one of them. And this Robert Hover was a space engineer from Los Angeles, who I also did a bunch of retreats with. And and he had a propensity to kind of touch this deep place in a person, and that deep place then maybe you couldn't say exactly what it was, but you knew something had happened, you know and that's, I think, sometimes the marvel of transmission in the Buddhist culture, you know and it's not something you can even say, but it's something that happens. And Ruth, she took what she had learned, and she had a little center uh, down in the desert, near Thousand Oaks there. I've forgotten the name of the town. 29 Palms, yes. And, and she had all these dogs, and I mean, she was eccentric, you know, to the nth degree, you know, but she had a heart of gold, and she understood Dharma from from the somatic point of view. So if you went to her after her kind of transformation, she was kind of the somatic vipassana insight teacher, because she was combining them, which we've learned to do over the years. We've had to take it and use it that way, because it's part of the lineage here, and she definitely was a piece of that lineage that has it's comes in all sorts of ways, and many people, you know, uh, I find the sweeping and incredibly helpful, because one of the things was, I know that when I first went to India, I had been taught to go out, especially with drugs, and I had to go in. And so when I turned to go in, one of the beauties of this is it was not something, somatic was not something that had been presented. You know, I mean, I'd been to Zen Center, and I kind of, Mayor Baba, oh, Hare Krishnas, I tried everything a little bit, and nobody really taught the body, you know, and that's something that came, and people like Ruth were the primal kind of teachers of the nature of the body, and that somehow, uh, you know, I remember going once to this was in New Delhi, maybe in 1972 or something like that. And I went to this Krishnamurti group, and I was amazed. The Indian, I don't think any of them knew where their feet were, you know, and they were incredibly smart and all that, but they had no idea. And so, in some ways, you can do this that way, but it's just incomplete. And I mean, to me, enlightenment is wholeness. Where someone becomes completely whole, and as they become whole, then they can teach the part of the somatic truth, because especially Western, we're particularly good about going to our heads and not our bodies. And she was one who kept just pointing back to it over and over and over again. You know, do you get it? Yeah, well, try again then. I mean, I think it took me years to actually uh, inhabit my body in that way, you know. And it's something that would seem obvious, but it's not, you know. And it does. It takes years. Part of it is you have to untrain the nature of our training in the West has nothing to do with the body. It has to do with the nature of the mind. And the mind is only one of three pieces. There's the mind, there's the body, and the heart. And somehow you have to address all three of those, you know. And that's something she did do, you know.
Yeah, I studied with her really for only 3 or 4 years in the late 70s. And one of the things she was hitting very hard then was this quality of Vedana, feeling, which in the Dharma is pretty important. It's one of the four foundations of mindfulness. It's one of the five aggregates, and it's right there in the chain of dependent origination, the operating system of samsara, is this feeling of liking, disliking, but then also the depth of feeling in terms of the emotional hatred, infatuation, jealousy, arrogance, and the heavy duty poisons. And she was emphasized in these very, at the beginning, strict Vipassana retreats, the feeling. So the body awareness, but also tuning into the emotional space. She emphasized that more than any other Vipassana teacher that I ever had. And she then, as her teaching evolved, she began to improvise. So rather than sitting, walking, you would sit for a time and then she would start interrupting your meditation because she could feel, which you can do when your mind gets still, you can feel people thinking. It's, you could say psychic and it's true, but it just comes from a quiet mind, an attuned mind. And so she would start interrupting and talking. And then she would have people stand up and do movements and other sorts of things, which I found extremely annoying because at that point in time, I was really focused on working the Vipassana program and getting enlightened. And this is what I'm not sitting, you just tough it out, you just sit. But that was exactly what she wanted, to those of us who were so hardcore, she wanted to break our ambition, our intensity, our limitedness. And so then that's why she would improvise and have people do things. And, oh, darling, loosen up a bit. And then she'd put her arm around you sometimes and do things that were outside the rules. So I want to share this story that she was sharing a lot in the 70s. Like John mentioned, she married this Henry Denison. He was a psychiatrist, but he was also really he was really into various spiritual paths. So their house, their living room in Hollywood would see people like Krishnamurti and Alan Watts and Aldous Huxley, Fritz Perls, and then they would have some kind of practice thing and they would talk. So she was part of this group at the very beginning of all of it, the whole counterculture. And so she happened to be present as Aldous Huxley was dying. And she attended him on his deathbed. Now, Aldous Huxley, if you don't know, was a total world-class philosopher, mystic, early psychedelic explorer, just an extraordinary genius. And she had the presence of mind to ask him as he lied there on his deathbed, what's the gist? What's the takeaway for you of everything you've done? All of it. What's it come down to? And he said, you know, I've learned to be a little kinder to myself. And so she would tell this story during retreats, which is a doorway into the feelingfulness. We have mindfulness, mission critical, but then going down that long branch of the body to the roots, to the feelingfulness. And this was just her attunement.
Vidna, the feeling tone of any experience. And the thing was that it'd be hard to know sometimes. I mean, she get pretty out there in her center and down in 29 Palms. Yeah. What's the name of it? It was
Dharma Dena.
Dharma. That's right. I went there many times and, it was sort of there were a lot of trailers, all these dogs and outhouses. Yeah. She was, and also it was 29 Palms, just in the middle of nowhere. The only thing that was out there was the Air Force dropping, well, you know what I mean, testing their stuff. And, but she also had, for all the trauma she had gone through, she had this great compassion for human beings. And so one of the things I can say, because I knew different people that would come and go there, she would take in some of the nuttiest people and she would love them. And, they would go into the meditation hall, which was always a little chaotic. Uh, and they would convert and suddenly be fairly normal people. She was, she would heal some of the most unhealable people I could think of. But it was that was part of her mission, was to help them find that middle ground, um, where their past and their fear of the future was not so big deal, that they could find this place where they could be with, as nutty as they sometimes were, with who they were. So that I thought was a phenomenal gift she had, just like with all the 29 dogs, you know,
29 poems, 29.
29 dogs, right? And I mean, it was quite a show. And I would, I taught and I would teach these in these 21-day retreats at a Frank Lloyd Wright place, the 29 Palms, the down south of there, maybe 40 minutes was Yucca Valley. And there was the Institute of Mental Physics. And so she would teach there sometimes. Uh, and I would go down there with Jack Cornfield and Joseph Goldstein and these retreats. And quite a place, you know. But here was this woman who, you know, very German accent. She always had her cane, and if you went up to her center, she had her dogs, and that was life. But she always, you know, she never she went back to L.A. a few times because what was his name? Her husband
Henry.
Henry, to help him, but she pretty much was on her own, you know. And anyway,
Mm.
it's a piece of it.
So I wanted to share um, how she was most important for me.
Mm.
At the 76, 1976, at a tender age, I hitchhiked from Ohio to British Columbia because the main thing I was going to college, but the main thing I was doing was bopping around North America wherever there was a Vipassana retreat. And so she was giving one in British Columbia, southern British Columbia, a place
Mm.
called Christina Lake. So I hitchhiked there and went into it. These were 10-day retreats at the time. And about a little over, probably halfway through, I hit a deep fear place, just terror. And I would be sitting and the terror would come up and I'd be struggling with that. And then the bell would ring and finally we leave and I walk and, shake it off and I go back, I'd sit again and there it would come again over and over. I was struggling intensely with this for probably a couple days. And then at the end of one day, and this retreat was being held in an old farm in a small barn that was reconstituted as a meditation hall, dimly lit. And so after the last sitting, the yogis would have their meditation shawls and against it was early autumn, against the autumn chill, and everyone was filing out quietly, of course. And so I went down because sometimes Ruth would stay and continue sitting. She was a very serious yogini, as well as uh, into dance and movement and all these other improv things. She was also a hardcore sitter. And so she remained sitting. Everyone was leaving. And so I went down and I told her what was going on for me. And so she invited me to bring my cushion down and sit in front of her, just her and me, which I did. So before long, that fear came up again, white hot or cold, probably. But in her presence, and probably I think at her direction, let it come, which I did. And so my whole body was just filled with this terror. And then the bottom fell out. And in its wake bubbled up this most exquisite bliss, well being, spacious awareness, totally without a reference point or ground. And I was just, wow, sitting with it as we did, eyes closed. But I feel I could have, was able to do that because of her support, her psychic support. her and I sitting there. And so then after a while, I opened my eyes to see her looking at me. And then she said, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Tuned in. So I owe her an enormous debt of gratitude for recognizing what I recognized, but was not strong enough to, was nowhere near strong enough to stabilize it. It left very soon after that, this opening. Well, what do you think, John?
Well, I think we should open it to questions or answers or something because time has slipped by.
As it does. So let's do that. Yeah, so if anybody wants to throw anything in, have a question, have at it.
And we'll pass the mic so that the folks on Zoom can hear anybody who wants to ask a question from in this room. So just raise your hand and I'll bring you the mic. And we'll look to Zoom also to see if there's a hand up. Great.
Hi, my name's Douglas. Since no one else was jumping in with stories of Ruth and I didn't know her, I thought I'd throw my experience of fear into the mix since we kind of ended with that. And I went through about a 5 day period of just being terrified for no reason. And it was just unbearable to be within myself with all this fear. And my only way of dealing with it was kind of to let other people know that this thing was happening with me. Wasn't something I could like hold inside and keep to myself. And so this one individual that I had never met before, but I'm spilling out my heart and my fear. He says, "That's the thing about fear." He says, "It's so tall and takes up so much space, and it's so wide, and you just can't see beyond it. It's only paper thin."
Great.
I'm Kate. One of the interesting things I was reading about her today, when she was sharing her abuse and just how she was able to keep a bigger perspective of she held it in such a bigger way, even though it was happening to her individually. I just thought that was very profound and certainly part of what we practice, but in theory, but it seemed to me, at least in her words, that, and there was another statement that somehow she felt like she was doing it for her country, or did you guys remember that part in there? Okay. Anyway, just this ability to
Yeah.
know it was happening, but that she was able to not take it personally. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Mm.
Yes, there's a way that she recognized that she didn't have the word karma at that point. She was a Christian then. But that it was just desserts for the horror that Nazi Germany visited upon the world. That there's a way, this is what goes around comes around. And she, even though she had nothing to do with Nazis, still she was German. And so she didn't blame them. Isn't that something?
Totally.
This is somebody who's really untrained. This reflects on her high capacity that she was born with in her mind stream. So Tibetans, of course, who were tortured and are tortured by the Chinese, the worst thing for them is they'll lose their compassion. And so it's so remarkable what they can do and what they had done in these prisons of not getting angry at their captors. She's like on that level. And she was as a kid, a young woman.
We have a question here on Zoom. Roseanne, if you would like to unmute.
Thank you. You guys hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, okay. Although I never met Ruth Denison, I have a Ruth Denison story. And probably around the early 2000s, 2001, she was having a retreat for women. I know that it was down in the desert, and I was considering going. And I worked in the schools, and it was in the middle of the school year, and I ended up calling down there. I had some kind of a logistical question, and to my surprise, Ruth answered the phone. And I ended up talking to her for like 15, 20 minutes, and it came out in my discussion with her that I had kind of an out of control teenage daughter, and that my life was kind of unraveling around that. And I just remember her saying to me, "Darling, you get 2 tickets and you come with your daughter to this retreat tomorrow," And honestly, it's one of my greatest regrets that I did not follow that advice, because it would have changed my life, in some way or other, right? And I just loved her for that. But I didn't have the courage and especially to bring my daughter. I just felt like, oh my God, I wanted to go on retreat, not bring this like rebellious teenager with me. And so anyway, I just really felt her love, her presence, and I wish I had had the courage at that time to follow through with her suggestion.
Yeah, that is a lesson to take to heart.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. Also, just want to say too, there's a great book called Dancing in the Dharma by Sandy Bosher that is about her life, that is incredible.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, you guys. Really have enjoyed this.
One more question?
Oh, I'm Kim, and I don't have a lot of experience with Ruth Denison, but I did spend probably 2 days down in Joshua Tree. A friend of a friend was meditating, doing a week long, and I had never meditated before, but this friend and I were intrigued, and we could go. And uh, anyway, I had no experience whatsoever. And we go into the meditation hall, and she puts on a phonograph. She had a phonograph, and she'd play this music. And while we're meditating, and then she said, "Okay, everybody get up and move. Just move your body to the music." And so we're all just moving around. This is my first experience with meditation. And then kind of self-consciously, but then we move. And then I remember she took a hold of this beam that was going from the ceiling to the floor. And this does not exist. It's not here. This piece of, anyway, but I just, that was my first experience with meditation. It took another 10 years before I actually started meditating, but she was out there. Yeah, very loving feeling in the group. That's my story. Ruth.
do a little metta here to close. First, if you want, this is just if you desire. In the tradition,
We can't hear you on Zoom, John.
Out of the tradition I come out of, this is a little stupa, and it has the bones, and traditionally you can take and put that on your head. And maybe it's a little bit of Ruth blessing you, and this is not a particular, it's good stuff. You may find it to be helpful. So just taking a moment to kind of bring your attention back and to this very body, this very place, this very time. And just take a moment to breathe into your heart. And so we have the sort of the practice of working with the mind and the breath and the nostrils, or in the belly. And this is really bringing the attention to the heart and recognizing that both the mind and the body come together there. This is the center point. And this could be called the middle way. And that we can take this heart and, first of all, just to bless ourselves. And may Ruth's wonder and joy and her healing be a part of your experience as you're here tonight. And just allow the collective and the community here, all of us here, that we have a collective energy or vibe that can be channeled. And so we take this energy, and those of you also on Zoom call that can take and bring your attention to your heart, and just know that you have a collective, a community here that is supporting you to awaken. And maybe, like Ruth said, oh, that pillar that was holding up the building is not real, empty of any inherent existence. And so it is with all things. All of this is just inherent existence. And we sit in the center of that, so there's actually no space between yourself and other. And we extend the heart to this great, wondrous experience of the tradition of one generation to another awakening through the efforts of the past and the efforts of now. We are a product of thousands of years of intention to awaken. And so it is that we too have this capacity to awaken for the benefit of ourselves, the benefit of beings everywhere. May all beings everywhere be happy. And whatever merit is accumulated through our coming together like this, and through the history and the power and energy of Ruth, that we extend it out so all beings may share in the merits of her dedication, our dedication, and those of all of us in this room and on this Zoom call. May all beings everywhere be awakened and at peace.